Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. In this video, I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to chat with a couple of the devs from the Chronicles Alexander DLC, which is officially out as of yesterday. Now, I admittedly don't do a lot of interviews, but the whole Chronicles project in particular is one I'm a huge fan of, as I think the game benefits a lot from single-player focused content, as well as the fact it's a great example of a community-led project that originated with the Rome at War mod, some of you may remember from a video a few years back. In this video, I had a great discussion with the original creator of the Rome at War mod, Roger Troop, who is now the lead producer at CaptureAge, as well as the narrative lead at CaptureAge, and Oxford-educated ancient historian Dr. Ben Angel. Hope you guys enjoy. So first off, guys, I just want to thank you for carving out a bit of time to chat. I know this is a very busy time for you, I'm sure. And maybe the best way to start is first by letting everyone know who you are and what you both do at Chronicles. And maybe Roger, we'll start with you.
Well, thanks for having us, Spirit. I'm Roger Troop. I'm the lead producer here at CaptureAge, overseeing production for the Chronicles series and the latest edition, Alexander the Great, which is about to release.
Great. And Ben?
I'm Ben Angel, and I'm the narrative lead at CaptureAge. I suppose narrative design means something entirely different at every different video game studio in the industry. So I kind of do all the things that you might expect a writer, narrative designer to do with story, characters, writing the script, casting, directing, voice actors. But I'm also involved in level design and game design generally. And I suppose I'm the de facto historical consultant for the studio.
Cool. How many guys are working on this team? Or I guess guys and gals. How big is this team?
I, there's multiple projects we're working on, but the Chronicles series of roughly about 30 people working on it.
Oh, wow, that's more than I thought. Okay. Actually, maybe a good place to start here next is let's talk about the origins of the whole Chronicles project and maybe how each of you got involved into it and how it's evolved over that time. I particularly like this story as I have a minor role to play in it. And yeah, maybe Roger, if you can tell us about kind of the origins of this.
Yeah, sure. It really started all in community. I was actually poking around in the forums when Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition dropped. And I fell back in love with the game. It's a game from my childhood. And I was poking around, saw another mod project going on. And it sort of fizzled out, but I learned some things from those guys and figured out how to port Age of Empires 1 Definitive Edition graphics into the game. And it got me thinking it would be cool to do a conversion mod with something set in antiquity based on Rome. And I started out just kind of myself trying to port graphics. And before long, I found out I couldn't do all of that. And so I actually hired an artist on CG Trader, and I got them to start making units for me. And I kept posting the content within the forums to just get attention and hopefully solicit, some designers to help with the effort. And we kind of just kept tinkering away there, and eventually, I got enough content out there that a few other folks decided to join the effort. And before long, I pulled them all into a Discord, and it was a bunch of international hobbyists, spread across the world, just tinkering here and innovating on civ designs and building assets for the game. And a few folks started to take notice as we were doing our playtests and we were posting in the forums. And a nice guy by the name of Spirit of the Law offered to showcase our mod, and that went up on YouTube. A few people noticed, and so that got featured a few years back on your YouTube channel. Folks took notice, and before long, we were in touch with World's Edge, Xbox Studios, and they asked us if we'd be willing to consider professionalizing it. And we as we were kind of evaluating those options, we got put in touch with CaptureAge, which they themselves were from community. They had created a spectator tool, and they had all the dev talent, and we had the content pipeline and the idea. And so we decided to partner and figure out how to develop content professionally for Age of Empires 2.
Ben, do you mind telling me how you got involved in this as the sort of historical consultant slash lots of different jobs guy?
Yeah. I guess they got all of that together, and then it was decided that there was going to be a single player focus. So they needed some campaigns. So the job went up for the narrative designer. At the time, I was working as a writer at Ubisoft on the Anno series, Anno 1800, and the upcoming Anno 117, another game set in the ancient world. So that's very much my niche. Um, Prior to that, I had been in academia all my life. I did a master's degree and a PhD in ancient history at the University of Oxford. And I had been, like Roger, a lifelong Age of Empires fan. Playing the original Age of Empires at sort of about age of 6 was really my first video game experience. Age of Empires 2 has always been my go-to favorite video game of all time. And so it was always an ambition of mine to work on the series. And when that job came up, yeah, it's just an incredible privilege to have the opportunity to work on it. So I came in. We had Athenians, Spartans, and Achaemenids, and I was told, right, make some campaign content out of that then. So it was a wonderful sort of blank slate, a really amazing creative time where we could kind of think things afresh. Because it was a brand new project, we could do things in a slightly different way for how they'd already been done in the Age of Empires franchise. So we started to come up with our wish list, which inevitably had to be pared down, but there were many things that we were able to achieve, like with the animated cutscenes, the very different approach to campaign structure, narrative delivery, etc. So yeah, I joined in April 2023, more than 2.5 years ago now, and yeah, the rest is history.
Can you tell us a bit more about that process of researching and synthesizing so much history into a cohesive narrative? It just feels like it would be hard to even know where to start.
Well, it all begins with me going over to my bookshelf over there and taking down a bunch of sources on the ancient world. So it always starts with the primary sources, with the ancient authors themselves. Obviously, I'm largely familiar with them already because of my academic background. So I'll trawl through those and come up with a general shape for the story for the DLC, and also pick out a set of levels that we can use to convey that story. Events that ideally have some promising gameplay potential in the context of Age of Empires. So I'll turn those into a set of concept pages for the levels with all the sources there, but also a historical overview that's a bit shorter. And from there, we'll work and brainstorm as a whole level design team and really come up with what's the core concept for each scenario, what's the core mechanic, how do we represent history through the gameplay. We come up with a pitch for each scenario that we're all really happy with, and then that's given to the individual level designer who's actually going to implement it in engine, and they hash out all of the grisly details. And then we start implementing to various stages, testing all the way through. And perhaps, Roger, maybe you can talk a bit about how we test and validate our designs once we start making them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as Ben talks about, we figure out what the story is, the narrative, what's the narrative arc we want to cover, and then as we get through outline, we have our series of production gates. We try to walk through, whether that's alpha, beta, and then kind of like a polish phase. And so, as we go through each one of those gates, we're really trying to we're trying to really lock down some of the designs, like what's the core mechanic we want to introduce, how does this fit into the overall narrative arc, and as we get through farther along, that testing becomes more and more rigorous, just through play testing. And towards the very end of it, it's really about the UX and the balance and making sure that this feels right, that the players have the right, impression of that level. And, uh, I think really circling back to something that Ben talks about is just we very much have taken kind of a campaign first, kind of narrative first vision of like how it is we're approaching these. And so, these levels, how do they fit into the historical story, and what cool stories do we get to tell about the characters that we're introducing to the player, and making sure that that lands correctly with how we're setting it up. And so, not only are we trying to work through kind of the being bug free and things working as intended, but it's also like, does it have the impact that we want it to have when the player engages with it? And so it's definitely a very collaborative process. It's iterative for sure. Um, we don't make a lot of sacrifices or compromises there, and so we will often go back and try to get that right because we think our fans expect it, and we expect it from ourselves.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a very well received, Battle for Greece, and I'm sure this Alexander one will be as well. So it seems to be paying off. Actually, we can talk about that a little bit on this one. So you're talking about sort of these balances that you have to make sometimes, and you're saying you try not to compromise on certainly quality, but there are some compromises I think you probably have to make in the story. So Alexander, for example, is a very polarizing figure. The more you look into it, it kind of gets glazed a little bit as this philosopher king is very multicultural and has never lost a battle. There's a very positive spin you can do on the guy, but there's also a very negative spin that, he kills family members, at least like step siblings. He kills one of his friends in a drunken rage. He's definitely an alcoholic, even by the time period, the standard of the time. And certainly there's a lot of things about his mother and a bit of a mama's boy. And I think this had more negative connotation back then in Macedonian culture. So you get the positive and the negative from both sides. So how do you thread that and try to come up with a single cohesive story that, keep in mind, it's supposed to be fun and entertaining as well?
Yes. Often we have the issue that there's very little source material for our characters. And as you say, with Alexander, it's the opposite. There's a multiplicity of sources, 5 major ancient sources for Alexander, none of which is ideal. They're all 3 to 6 centuries after his death. And each of them has its own view of Alexander and has its own agenda. I mean, Quintus Curtius Rufus, for example, the Roman writer, isn't really writing about Alexander at all. He's writing about Roman despotic emperors, and he uses the figure of Alexander to talk through that. So all of these sources are conflicted and strange, and modern scholars' views have diverged even further. For someone like W. Tarn, who was basking in the last dying twilight of the British Empire, Alexander was this very positive, romantic, idealistic figure, a man who was going to bring the world together, sort of thing. For Ernst Badian, who was coming at the tail end of the worst horrors of the 20th century, on the other hand, Alexander is a psychopathic, paranoid tyrant. So you can really make of Alexander whatever you wish. And as a historian, if I was to write a historical account of Alexander, I would perhaps be very cautious and say, we can't really say anything definitive about Alexander at all. He's lost to the mists of time because of the problems with our sources. That, when you're doing historical fiction, would make for a very, very boring character. So we do have to be bold and pick what we're going to do with Alexander. The key thing all the way through was answering this question of what is it about this guy that he could convince people to follow him to the ends of the earth? Like the fact is that we know that the people did that. So what was it about him that accounts for that fact? And so we turn Alexander into this rather strange, rather larger than life figure, like a figure from a Sophoclean tragedy. He's someone like Achilles from the Iliad, someone who is kind of greater than other mortals. There's something, a whiff of supernatural about him, but there's also something terrible and dangerous about that fact, almost as if this is not the sort of being that's supposed to coexist with normal mortals on Earth. And you see this throughout the campaign. People comment on Alexander with this mix of awe and fear. And I did a strangeness pass on Alexander's lines. I kind of went back and made them all a little bit weird. You'll notice as the campaign goes on, he sort of says things, and you just think, who talks like that? Who says that? Because he is this extraordinary figure. It's almost like he's got kind of matrix vision. He sees the world as something grander and more magnificent and more epic than ordinary people do. And there's something really magnetic about that. But in good Greek tragic style, that's also the seed of his downfall. He is going to go too far. He is going to do some of those terrible things that you mentioned. And ultimately, his army is going to mutiny and say, no, we're not going any further. So just accounting for that extraordinary arc that we know has to happen with the character himself is a very tough thing to do because, I'm just a little British fellow. How do you convey a sense of extraordinary charisma and personality? It takes a lot of work, but the portrait of Alexander that we have, I think, is extraordinarily interesting and multifaceted. So, I like the Oliver Stone movie, but I do sometimes wonder, would I really follow that Colin Firth Alexander to the end of the world? I think there's something a little more interesting going on with Alexander in our DLC.
Actually, now that you mentioned that movie, there was something that I've noticed. It's come up in my comments section a couple times. Wondering if you could just quickly answer it. So you went for sort of a Scottish slash Irish accent for the Macedonians, and I've heard in that movie they did that because the Macedonians were kind of like this rural northern community to the Greeks who saw themselves as more civilized. Is that sort of a play on the English, seeing the Scottish and the Irish as a little more rural? Is it kind of playing off that idea, or is it just a coincidence?
But I'm really glad you brought up the voice acting because it's something I'm very passionate about. I can't promise you a short answer here because it's a subject that I'm so passionate about. And as soon as I joined and started working on Chronicles, I wanted to do voice acting and indeed the style of the writing in a very particular way. And it's been very gratifying to see that the effort that we put into the voice acting is something that's been praised in all of the reviews and all of the online comments. It's really wonderful to see. What we do with the accents specifically. So you notice even in Battle for Greece, it's a mixture of English accents. There's northern accents, Yorkshire accents, a whole mix of them. Ultimately, what I try to do with the accents is match the voice to the character. It's got to be the voice should instantly give the audience an impression of who the character is and what their background is. And I think actually it's no less authentic than using other types of accents. Firstly, because people say, why does he have a Scottish accent or why does he have an English accent? Nobody ever asks why are they speaking English. It's already artificial. And then what would an ancient Macedonian accent even sound like? What would an ancient Greek accent sound like? It certainly wouldn't sound like a modern Greek accent. They're completely different languages. So already there's plenty of artificiality. But what you can do if you use modern accents is instantly key the audience into who that character is. You think of, say, Aristides in Battle for Greece, where he speaks with, a very upper class, very posh accent. The reference that I gave to the actor was Tobias Menzies, who plays Prince Philip in The Crown. You instantly get a sense that he's this kind of upper class aristocratic character. And he's contrasted with Themistocles, who has a Yorkshire accent. It's just the actor Enzo Cilenti's natural accent. And you instantly get a sense of their relative stations in society, that he's the kind of upstart, he's not part of the traditional elite. So with Alexander campaign specifically, yes, I did use the Scottish accent to give the sense that the Macedonian royal family are somewhat different from the Greeks, that they are these kind of rugged Highlanders, the sort of thing that Oliver Stone was going for. So Clytus, I had that Scottish accent in my mind all the time when I was writing him. Philip, interestingly, when we auditioned, I said, he could have an Irish accent, he could have a Scottish accent, Welsh, Northern, just as long as it's not Southern RP. And we had a whole range of different casting options. We went with Alec Newman, who, as you've heard, just magnificent performance. He's a brilliant actor. Recently won a BAFTA for Still Wakes the Deep. He's terrifying in that role. And you'll notice Parmenion, who is also Macedonian, has an upper class English accent because that's his character. And again, I notice when we watch people play, they hear Parmenion talk for the first time and they instantly get who he's meant to be, this smarmy upper class person who looks down on people. So it's a stylistic choice. Not everybody is going to agree with it, but I think the boldness has paid off. I think if we didn't do it, you wouldn't have characters like Aristagoras and Lysander from Battle for Greece. So I shall defend that decision to the hill.
I think it's, well, one, it's always amazing talking to, hearing Ben talk about this. And this is part of the evolution of going from a mod to professional content development. I mean, I think it just comes across when you listen to Ben talk about this and his command of like the historical facts and the direction here. Like, as we joined CaptureAge, it was we needed to expand the team and work with professionals who have this experience, and I think that clearly comes through when you're listening to Ben talk about his enthusiasm about it. I would also say, just add to this choice that we've made in terms of the accents. And I remember when we were auditioning and looking at the first potential cast for Battle for Greece, and there was just I think we attempted to do accents, and we just couldn't get the character to come out the way we wanted to, if I remember correctly, Ben. And I think that's when we partly made this decision, and it was just like these characters came jumping out at you the moment we went this direction. And Lysander and these characters that we're talking about, I think, just hit really well. And I think it was a wise choice to do.
I knew all from the start the way I wanted to do it, but we did get some with Greek accents from the studio, yes, because they had worked on other Age of Empires content previously, and I think there was sort of some confusion over this new direction we were going. So we had to sort of iron that out. But we worked with the amazing Side Studio in London, and certainly for the Alexander DLC. Now that we've been through it once, they really get what we're going for. We have a lot of meetings with them beforehand. I am completely involved in the casting process, doing it live as well as listening to the recordings after now. So they really get what we want, and I tell you, the choices of actors that they gave us, magnificent. And when you hear the talent in this campaign, this is just an incredible voice cast we've got, and a lot of them are proper award-winning actors on screen and stage, and the job they've done for this is magnificent.
Well, I've only played 3 missions, but so far it's very impressive, I have to say. Next, you guys mind if we talk a little bit about civilization design? So I know you're very limited in how many civs you can pick, so I bet you were kind of capped at 3. And obviously Macedonians are in. I'm wondering if you can comment on Thrace and Puru. I don't think too many people had heard of Puru before this. I'm curious if these felt like obvious choices to you guys, or if this is something there was quite a bit of debate internally about.
Yes, there is a story. So Thrace, we kind of settled on fairly quickly because it's Alexander's sort of first real campaign. When he comes to power, he goes up into the Balkans and deals with these Thracian tribes that have always been menacing Macedon's borders for hundreds of years. And we also wanted this sort of prologue before Alexander becomes king, where he goes with his father up north and he faces Thracians like the Tribali. So we knew we wanted them in there, and we knew it could be a really cool civ. These mountain men with the Romfire blades, these sort of wicked, long, Folks-like blades. We thought that was just so cool. As for the Puru, now, of course, there's got to be the South Asian civilization. That takes up a good portion of the end of our campaign. And you may be wondering, indeed, why didn't we go with someone very famous like the Marian Empire or the Nanda Empire? I think if we were sort of going civilization first, then maybe that's who we would have picked. But because it's campaign first, we thought it would be a bit odd if we had, say, the Marian Empire. You play the Alexander campaign, which takes place before they really rose to power. You never encounter the Marians, or if you do, they're simply renamed. We thought that might be a bit odd, and players might feel a bit cheated by that. So we thought, okay, let's just go with the people that Alexander actually fought, who fought under King Porus. Right, okay, nice and simple. Who were they then? You realize very quickly that the sources don't tell you what the name of this kingdom or the name of this people were. You look at the modern books that we have, they either call them the Puru or the Pauravas, or some scholars, Alexander Stoneman's book, just says Puru/Pauravas. And there are no ancient Indian sources for King Porus, so we don't have anything to go from there either. So we went with Puru as the name just because closer to the kingdom of Porus, that's specifically what it is. The architecture set is beautiful, I'm sure you'll agree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's great. We got it in some screenshots. I haven't gotten that far in the campaign yet, but yeah, the screenshots showing it off. It looks great.
Yeah, I would say that a part of the Civ choices that we do make I guess this is more me wearing the production hat of just thinking, where do we get, what could we explore and how many architecture sets could we possibly put in there? I think you want to strike a balance of meaningful civilizations that obviously fit with the narrative, but then also are interesting, aesthetic, and give variety to this world. Because depending on who you choose, you are limited by what you can do. And I think the more architecture sets we can put into the game that fill out this story, but then also just create the richness of the world and creating this antiquity setting is is our goal here for sure.
Okay, so next, just to switch topics here. This is going to be kind of out of nowhere. So one thing that I see a lot of my comments is people asking, "Oh no, are these going to come to ranked? How are they possibly going to balance these things? You know, the totally different naval tech tree with the regular civilizations." Do you mind just speaking to that? Like, these are definitely never coming to ranked. Anything that's in Chronicles, and also, what do you guys have any ideas for using these civilizations? You know, not in ranked, but outside of just the campaign, because it seems like such a shame to have these very fully fleshed out civilizations. I just put up an overview today for Thracians, and I mean, people love hearing all these like ideas about how you can play their very interesting late game. I don't know, like, what do you think of that? Besides, like, not ranked, but any ideas you guys are kicking around for getting more use out of these civilizations?
So I will say there are no plans to add them to ranked, but I do we are listening to the community and looking for ways of how do you increase the replayability outside of campaign, and what interesting game modes or things we could do there that would encourage that. And so yeah, we're with 6 civs now in the Chronicle series. We have a few more options than we had before, and we're going to continue to look there and see what we can do.
Hmm. Well, a couple of ideas that come to mind are, first of all, if you can just comment on perhaps a different ranked ladder just for those civilizations. And also, I don't know if you've seen it in the latest Age of Mythology release, they now have this gauntlet mode where it's like a single player and you replay it and it's very random and you get kind of bonuses. It's like a roguelite where you play it and you play it again with different bonuses and play it again. You unlock things as you replay it. Either of those ideas kind of jumping out at you as potential down the road?
Well, the gauntlet is something CaptureAge played a part in the design there, so
Oh, is that
we're
right?
we're familiar with that. But yeah, I would say we're definitely looking to see what options make the most sense, with the civ sets that we have and the balance we have, and where we can kind of flex on the product and give players what they want.
So what does that mean for potential ranked ladder? Is that something you guys are considering? Because I have seen that suggested a few times. Do you think there would be enough of a player base to sustain that? Like, this would be a separate ranked ladder from the other civs, just to be very clear.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that we have considered, and we've been looking at, but we haven't made any plans yet that I could comment on.
So switching topics here a little bit, I was curious if you guys can talk about maybe the most time intensive part of the process. So whether that's research, the new civ design, the missions and the campaigns, the visual overhauls, the music, like, what's the biggest investment that you guys just refuse to compromise on?
What do we refuse to compromise on? Pretty much everything is the answer.
Okay,
In
fair enough.
fact, on Battle for Greece especially, we were quite bad at saying no to ourselves. Um, we've got a very enthusiastic team, and a lot of us come directly from the Age of Empires community or have been lifelong fans of the series. So we all have this drive to just put in as much stuff as we possibly can. And I think people have seen that. It's hugely high effort DLC in every area. So we don't compromise on that. I'm glad you brought up the music. If you'll allow me to wax lyrical for a minute about that, because the new soundtrack is incredible. I got to be very indulgent there. I have a huge love of sort of classic Hollywood soundtracks, Miklos Rosa, sort of Ben-Hur, Quo Vadis, that sort of thing. So I was bombarding our wonderful composers over at Somatone Music with references, and they just sort of turned all of my favorite soundtrack pieces into new and fresh soundtrack pieces. So it's this amazing score which balances classic Hollywood and a lot of my favorite classical music with a sort of modern Hans Zimmer-esque sensibility. And music, I think people don't realize how much it elevates the experience and helps make it unique. We, of course, have unique playlists for every single scenario. And we've also now added the ability to switch them midway through a scenario so that when an event happens, a dramatic narrative event, we can switch the soundtrack to something appropriate. We also have a new playlist for skirmish mode that really helps set the mood. And we have immersive playlists if you choose that setting in the settings menu for each civilization individually. So that's a really awesome thing. The thing that takes the most time, I think, would have to be the level design. Um, a lot of people have played around with the editor, and you think you can get a level looking functional pretty quickly, but my word, the number of rounds of iteration and feedback and testing and difficulty play testing and then bug fixing you have to go through for every single scenario, it's a huge amount of effort.
Well, I would think particularly because of how many choices you get. Like, it's not just this persistent choices that you guys have put in, but even in mission 2, there's a lot of like, okay, which path do you want to take? And it gives you the choice on the side of the screen. So there's a lot of replayability there, but I imagine that makes things very complicated to design, and especially like bugs and everything, and you have to anticipate all the different ways people can do stuff.
Yeah, I would second that. That it is level design that I think is probably the most intensive. It particularly adds some very strong dependencies down in the production. So because of we tend to lock in our final script when we're really locked in on the gameplay, that will kick off VO and localization and everything there. And some of this factors back into how we do our cutscenes and the final timing and animation there. So I think it's making. I mean, the level design is definitely it has some of the longest run of the production time, and then it's the particularly challenging areas of sort of the dependencies that come off of it, as it wraps up and it gets to a certain stage. So, but yeah, it's also one of the areas where we don't want to compromise because it's so core to what we're trying to accomplish with Chronicles. And part of that too, I would say, is we try to introduce some novel mechanics and features within our campaign. The persistent choices is obviously a way at allowing some replayability within them. But when you build in these systems and you try to figure out how to make them scalable and debug them and not brittle, it can be some fun challenges not to break the editor in our levels.
You should have seen the original plans for the persistent choice system, where I've got this sort of board up, and it's, oh no, but if we do that, we run into time travel problems and the grandfather paradox. How are we going to do this?
Yes.
No, no. So it went through a lot of iterations.
Hmm. Is that something you guys have done more of in the Alexander DLC, like the choices and persistent choices? Because I know that was something you were kind of experimenting with in Battle for Greece. And did you double down more on that with that?
We have not fundamentally changed how the system worked technically. You'll notice, so we created this persistent variable system in Battle for Greece. And then you saw that Forgotten Empires and Three Kingdoms DLC had an explicit choice system where you could click a button. Now we have that functionality as well. So, they get something of ours, we get something of theirs. It's a lovely partnership. So we've used that in our campaign, but we've not changed the underlying system. However, we have changed the nature of some of the choices that you get to make. You say you've only got to the third scenario so far, but as you go further into the campaign, we have this persistent army feature because we were aware that having 16 scenarios as the Macedonians, which we felt was necessary to tell Alexander's story, the players, are going to be playing with the same civ a lot. So we really wanted to get a lot of variety in there. One of the ways we do this is with our level design, of course. No two levels are the same, it gets mixed up every time. But the other thing that we have is this persistent army feature where you're going to be able to choose between different units to add to your army, and you can recruit them in that scenario and then in every future scenario as well. So that by the end of the campaign, you've built up a whole roster of different units, including units from the other Chronicles civilizations, which you can recruit as the Macedonians.
I was also wondering if you could maybe touch on the difficulty balance, because that seems like that might be one of the harder things to do. Is this has to be fun for top players who are streaming this. You get top 100 players. that are playing this, but you also have those, very, very casual, maybe their first time playing Age of Empires 2 and they just want to jump into a campaign setting. So how do you go about making that difficulty spread? And is that something that you're really paying attention to?
Yeah, we definitely paid a lot more attention to it than we did with Battle for Greece. I think it was a fair criticism of Battle for Greece, and we comb the forums and the reviews for the feedback. We take it all on board, and we really try to improve in the areas where we feel we need to. And the difficulty was a little inconsistent in the Battle for Greece campaign. I think a lot of people found maybe standard difficulty was a little too hard. Hard could be a little too easy sometimes. So we really wanted to address this. The first thing we did was to plan it out a little more cohesively right from the start. We have a difficulty curve for the whole campaign that we planned out. In our level designs, we were thinking, right, what are the different levers that we can pull to affect difficulty in this level? Is it going to be the number of troops that are sent against you? Is it going to be how often they're sent against you? Um, but really, the main thing that's allowed us to refine the difficulty a lot more is just extensive playtesting. I think with Battle for Greece, we got it into people's hands a little too late, whereas this time there have been a large number of very large scale playtests with players from all sorts of different difficulty levels, right from, people who want to play on the story mode that we've added, the new easiest mode, all the way up to legendary, which is the new hardest sort of challenge mode. And we've managed to get it to a place where most of the people who play on those difficulties, who consider themselves set for that difficulty, are really satisfied with what we've got. We'll see how the community receives it when it goes out to thousands more people, but we think we've done a much better job this time.
Well, I've heard a rumor that you have a top 100 player who has gone through and said the legendary will make anybody sweat, right at the top. So,
This is
I mean,
true.
that's quite the endorsement.
I've watched him panic in real time, and
Yeah.
it's delightful.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to build on something that Ben said there, which is I think Battle for Greece was pretty foundational in terms of figuring out where we needed to spend more time and then factoring that in. And we still continue to learn from that process and figuring out, where do we spend more time and when to get that right. So
Makes a lot of sense. So, one last thing here. I got a bit of a rumor I'd like you to address if you can. So, I think this is because AOE1 and AOE3 new content is sort of in limbo. Currently, people are just looking to worry about stuff. There's some speculation this might be the last of the Chronicles, and I get there's limits on what you can say. But are you able to speak in any way to that rumor and what the future might hold? Particularly because this all started with the Rome at War mod, and we haven't even had Romans yet. I mean, we can't end it now, guys. We still have to do Hannibal and Republic of Rome, obviously. So, are you guys already cooking up ideas for the next one, or is there anything you can say about this?
well, we can't really comment on future projects, but what we can say is we love making amazing content, and we appreciate all the support we get from the community. And so we encourage folks to buy Alexander the Great. Leave a review, tell a friend about it. We have ambitious plans, and we love doing this, and we want to keep being able to do it.
I'd echo that. I I'll say that our design team currently is larger than it ever has been. We improve constantly all the time. I think you're going to see a huge difference between Battle for Greece and Alexander the Great. I mean, Battle for Greece was fantastic, and I think we've surpassed it with Alexander the Great. So, CaptureAge is set to do brilliant things. And as Roger says, if you enjoy the work that we're doing, we'd love it if you could spread the word. I mean, the Age of Empires community is a little insular. Um, I think there are many other people out there who would love to know that there's something kind of new and different. It's not just another Age of Empires DLC. It's maybe something that's appealing to fans of history, of narrative games, of RTS games more generally. So we're going to be trying to put the word out there in the next few weeks. And if you appreciate what we do, we hope you'll join us.
I think that's a fantastic place to leave it. And I will say everything I've played with it has been a lot of fun. It's just as good as Battle for Greece or better. You guys have really outdone yourselves, I dare say. So, thanks very much for your time, guys, and all the best.
Thank you, Spirit. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having us.
You're a legend, Spirit. We love you. Thank you so much.
You guys too. So that was my discussion with a couple of devs at CaptureAge, and I really can't say enough good things about both Battle for Greece and what I experienced in Alexander so far. As someone who doesn't typically get swept up in AoE2 campaigns, these are honestly the most challenging and fun experience I've had in single-player AoE2, and I highly recommend checking out the Alexander DLC. That'll do it for this one though. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.